Good evening. I call to order this meeting of the Concord Planning Board on Tuesday, June 20th, 2023 at 7 p.m. The Planning Board is convening this meeting by video conference using the Zoom application. This meeting will be recorded for future on-demand viewing. I'd like to welcome everyone attending this meeting and take attendance of members and staff. Rob Almeida.
Here.
Andrew Boardman. I think not here at this point. Sue Felshen.
Here.
Abby Flanagan.
Here.
Mark Giddings. And myself, Linda Miller. Town Planner, Elizabeth Hughes.
Here.
Thank you. Each vote will be conducted by roll call. There will be public participation during certain portions of the meeting. Those participating remotely, wishing to make a statement or ask a question during public participation, should use the Zoom raised hand function or *9 on a phone and wait to be recognized. Once recognized, you may unmute yourself or use *6 from a phone and then speak. When you speak, please address the chair, identify yourself by name, address, and any relevant affiliations, and speak clearly for the meeting. Comments during public participation are limited to 3 minutes or less, except for extenuating circumstances, and are requested to be respectful. Answers to questions, unless very brief and fact-based, will be deferred for follow-up at future meetings. The board welcomes written comments at any time instead of, or in addition to, those made by during public participation. Written materials for this meeting are posted on the Planning Board section of the town's website. And now we will go to the first item on the agenda. That would be recommendation to the ZBA, Concord Center for the Visual Arts, for a special permit with site plan review under zoning bylaw sections 7.1.3, 7.7.2.12, 11.6, and 11.8 to demolish the existing Coleman Gallery and construct a 2,593 square foot addition to the existing 7,349 square foot non-conforming structure and relief from parking at 37 Lexington Road, parcel number 0015. Would the applicant like to make a presentation or answer questions?
Yes.
Good evening. I'm John Battle. I'm the architect and for this project, and we have gone through our preliminary presentation previously for the planning board. Should, in the interest in what is it in the best interest of everything, should we go through it again? I have with me tonight are the primary consultants for the project and members of our staff to be able to answer specific questions. So we would be happy to take the presentation right from the top, or to pick up where we left off previously, which was and I'm going to ask, maybe Elizabeth, you may give us guidance on how you'd like us to proceed on that issue, or the chair.
Sure. What do you think, Elizabeth?
I think you can just pick up from where you left off and go over some of the additional information that you provided. I think specifically it dealt with mostly addressing the traffic and parking concerns. Because I don't believe there were any other modifications made to, there were some minor things made to the actual site design, but I think
it has been a long process going back and forth between various consultants and some additional requested survey and study information. So perhaps we could go directly to discussing issues of the modifications to the traffic study and see how we can best answer your questions on that issue. So I will turn that over to Bob to kind of manage Bob Drew from my office to be able to address the specific concerns and to defer to the traffic person when appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
So to explain to where we currently stand, there was a peer review of the parking study, which was completed by TEC Engineering Corp. And then he presented this memo to us, which our parking consultant followed up in regards to and answered all the questions. There was a lot of emails back and forth. There was a separate meeting with ourselves, our parking consultant, the peer reviewer, Elizabeth, and the town engineers. So there was a lot of chefs. And so they're I think in terms of where we stand as of last week, and as of, I think there was a couple of items on this per this memo that might be a couple of conditions per the approval if we do gain approval here. One is such as the a post construction evaluation of the parking, after a certain amount of months after construction has been completed. And then I think the other one was in regards to, give me 1 second. I think the other one was about possibly incorporating some changes around the site, around where Concord Art is, in terms of like, I think that falls more with the town of Concord, but like, warning signs and construction curb line cuts and all and additional stuff to the sidewalks that are in Concord as part of this. I think that falls more on top of towards the town of Concord's piece of this, but those are only two main outstanding issue items, which are obviously very manageable. All the other questions that the peer review asked about during their review of the parking study has been answered. And it's a pretty long memo, but say if you look at the top one, it says comment close, comment close, comment close, comment close. So it's all been kind of, I think everyone involved had an understanding where we're going with this. Happy to dive farther into each question if you like. It might take a bit, but I don't know if you have a chance to review this memo or not.
Yes, it was in our package.
Okay.
It's online and available. Mhm.
Okay. But the last two open items, like I just described, I think are very manageable on our end, are doable on our end as part of the conditions for the project.
Okay.
That was the biggest piece of since we last saw you in March, was this parking study. There was a lot of other information, and with the exception of this parking study, such as how the site's going to be used, how the contractor is going to park. We've enclosed memo, kind of like a really rough memos from each church where we use their parking, and the allowance of letting the church, letting the Concord Art use the parking for big events. And that was all part of the package we submitted in April. We're happy to dive into those details as well if you have any questions. It's a lot.
Sure. Okay, so now we're on the question and answer side, and I guess I will then ask any of the board members, planning board members, if they have any questions for the applicant. Or I can start. I guess one question I had was the issue, and I think this was, I'm not sure, fully dealt with in terms of the signage for the handicap accessible parking space. And I think you have a van sign there, and I assume you will just change that to a handicapped accessible signage.
That's correct. And we're also going to relocate it to be more visible. It's towards the back of the spot. Give me 1 second to get the right plan up for you. It was originally back here. You can see where my cursor is pointing. We're going to change the sign.
We can't see your screen. We can't.
Oh,
shoot. We can't see your screen.
I'm sorry. I had it shared a minute ago. Sorry, guys.
There you go.
Sorry about that. So you see where I'm pointing right here? That's where the existing sign is. We're going to move it more towards the front to this corner of the building, so people can see it as if pulling up and pulling close.
To make it more visible.
Yep, and it won't be a van sign. It'll be just a standard handicap sign.
Great. And then I think there was a request on the part of Public Works for a more formal agreement between Holy Family and Parish, and First Parish and yourselves. But we did have sort of on their email stationery agreement, informal agreements, and I just wanted to see if those agreements are something that the consensus of the board is that they're adequate or not. Does anyone have a view on whether that, in terms of peak parking capacity, would be something we'd be comfortable with?
The first one, just to give you an update, the First Parish is a little more formal here with the letterhead. Holy Family is a little more informal. I believe these guys keep everything very simple,
Mhm.
like we all should.
Yeah. I'm Elizabeth.
I can easily, should the board be recommending approval, easily just craft a condition that there just be one, one letter, explaining what the agreement is, and then just have somebody from each of those organizations sign it. Just
Okay.
so it's all in one place, and that can go in the file.
And that'll be in like Concord art letterhead, probably. That's like something, yeah,
Yep.
something like that. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Something fairly simple. But
Would you
then
be
it's in one place, it can go in the file and be part of the record.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Be comfortable with that? In terms of the applicant?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. And then in terms of the crosswalk improvements that are mentioned, and you said are somewhat Concord's responsibility. I think we're all sort of thinking about that and where we should go with that. Abby, do you have some thoughts on that or other issues?
I had thoughts on the agreements between First Parish and Holy Family. In the agreement, I would just specify that if for some reason it was anticipated that the parking would be needed and that the parking would be unavailable on those dates, that Concord Art would reschedule the event to a mutually agreeable date, something along those lines, so that the way they're written now is it's kind of, if it's available, you're welcome to use it. But I just want to stave off an instance in which it was needed, not available, and the event were to proceed anyway. The impact of that, I think, would be concerning. So I would want it structured just that, Concord Art would make its best efforts to schedule events with an anticipated need for that parking on dates that the parking was actually available. Because they don't really have under that kind of agreement, they don't really have a right to the parking. It's being offered as a courtesy. So
That's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a rare occasion, so we don't have a problem with that.
yeah, and I think that would be I think this has worked cooperatively in the past, and I don't anticipate that it wouldn't work cooperatively in the future, but I just like to
I agree.
kind of cross those T's and dot those I's.
Sue?
Yes, I did have a question about possible street improvements, and I think this is a question for Elizabeth. In a project of this sort, is it customary for the town to take on the full burden in a case like that, or to request that the applicant contribute in some manner to street or sidewalk or pedestrian or bicycle improvements due to traffic increases from a project?
So I think it's a conversation based on the nature of the project. If you think about this project and, John or Robert can correct me, you're looking at an increase of 8 people for their classes. I don't see this as a project that warrants the applicant to address issues with crosswalk. My other concern is that that crosswalk is on a state route. It's 2A. There's there's very particular processes that have to go, have to be met as far as crosswalks and approaches and ADA requirements and, tactile warning mats and sight distance and road speed. And there, it's not just, a simple fix. And while this organization does have people walking and utilizing, that crosswalk, there's, there's thousands of people every year that, are doing it going to Hayward Meadow or Old Hill Burying Ground or Monument Square. And to have this one applicant make those improvements, I don't think the project warrants that, given all of these other factors. And additionally, the town is getting ready, the planning division is getting ready to execute a contract with a consultant to do a town-wide transportation and mobility plan, which will help us prioritize projects and will also help prioritize, funding and getting grants. So I don't see this project, meeting that threshold of having to take on the responsibility of those improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So could we, any other questions from the board on that issue? Do we have a consensus then that we could give Elizabeth in terms of when she has to write this up, in terms of any issues with regard to changes? I think we could probably go with her sense that while desirable, it's certainly not necessary that there be made any changes to the basic infrastructure around that intersection. Is that fair? Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other?
I'm going to
questions
stop.
or-
I'm going to stop sharing because I could see Abby's head nod yes, but I couldn't see Rob. So I don't know if he was also in agreement. Yes. Okay. So I definitely think I have, a consensus of the board, and I can add that explanation about that, because I do feel it's good for the board if a town department does recommend a condition that we, address why the board isn't, moving forward with making that consistent recommendation. And then the other conditions that were identified by the outside consultant or engineering, all other town departments had just standard conditions. All of their issues and concerns were addressed, couple months ago. So I think I definitely have enough to prepare a draft recommendation letter for the board for you. It would be your July 11th meeting. And this is on the agenda for the Board of Appeals for the 13th.
Excellent. So do we need a motion to continue this to a certain time on the 11th? Or can we
No,
just?
yeah, you don't need a particular motion because you're only
Motion.
making a recommendation, but
Okay,
I do, let me, I'm not, let me see what is on the agenda, because you do have a definitive subdivision. And I think the notice for that has already been published. And so that's and I can't open that document. So I would, as chair, since it's only a recommendation, I would just continue discussion of this item to review your draft recommendation letter and have it be on the agenda right after the definitive subdivision. OneDrive
Right.
won't open now, so I can't see the agenda.
Okay, so shall we say
Would this,
7?
I have a question. Would this require us to be attending with all of our consultants and staff to be attending this subsequent hearing, or is this, or are we going to have gotten through that stage?
So it's not, it would not be a hearing. The board would just be reviewing their written recommendation letter. I think
Thank you.
if just you and Robert were to attend, if you had any questions about conditions or
Yep.
comments,
Okay.
that would be
We
fine.
definitely could be there. That's not a problem.
The
Yeah,
public
this is-
hearing will be at the Board of Appeals on the 13th.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we will see you all on the 11th, and we'll probably put it on the agenda at 7:10. Should the earlier presentation, you never know if they might ask for a continuance or something. So you can check in with us at a later date and get a better sense of the timing, I'm sure. So
Okay.
thank you.
So,
Thank you all very much.
thank
Okay.
you very much.
We'll
Thank
see
you.
soon.
Okay. Okay. Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Okay. I don't think I asked for public. I guess we could ask for public if there's any public comment now on 37 Lexington. Trying to see, I'm sure there is none, but I see none. So then we'll move on. We'll move on to administrative business. And the first thing would be, we're going to take public comment. It will be limited up to 15 minutes with no more than 3 minutes allocated to any one speaker. And this section of public comment will be limited to items that are not currently on the agenda. So I will look and see if we have anyone who would like to bring up any new topics for the planning board to consider. Seeing none, then we'll move on to the MBTA communities slides and a bit of an update here. And I don't know, Elizabeth, quite how to share my screen.
So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a green share screen button.
All right. Try that.
And then it'll bring up basically images of all those things. Yep. There you go.
Oh, can you see it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good because I can't, but I will move ahead. See if I can.
Oh, now we see Zoom.
Oops.
So you want to click your MBTA communities tab again. There you go. And if you make it full screen.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. All right. So, let me get my notes here. Excuse me for a moment. So the next item on the agenda is something we're going to be bringing up for every meeting between now and town meeting. The MBTA Communities Act has the potential to have a significant impact on the town's built environment. It's complex and it's important to receive community input into the design of this zoning. This presentation is just in preparation for our community-wide kickoff meeting at the Harvey Wheeler Community Center at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, June 28th. And I hope that you all can join us there. It will be a hybrid meeting and details are available on the Planning Department webpage. At that session, we will have town staff, planning consultants, and GIS consultants available to answer questions and hear public comment. So the purpose of this overview is to briefly inform all board members about the issues in the legislation and to generate questions that we would like staff and the consultants to address next week. The MBTA Communities Act, often referred to as Section 3A, is a set of zoning requirements that promote the production of transit-oriented multifamily housing to address a housing shortage in Massachusetts. Our purpose is to create a multifamily overlay district or districts to implement Concord's townwide vision of housing by developing specific zoning recommendations that reflect community goals, expanded housing opportunity, oriented to our transit centers, preserving town character, supporting our sustainability goals, and achieving compliance with Section 3A. We will use the Housing Production Plan and Comprehensive Long-Range Plan as a basis for our process. Our goal is to present a compliant zoning amendment created with substantive community engagement for approval to the 2024 annual town meeting. As you can see from this data, Concord has in the past built multifamily housing. However, this trend has diminished over the past 10 years, despite a growing need for housing. To be compliant, Concord needs to accomplish many objectives in its new zoning overlay districts. I will highlight these components and then discuss each throughout the remainder of the presentation. We need to create new multifamily zoning districts or districts as of right in at least one reasonably sized district of developable land at a minimum density of 15 dwelling units per acre within half a mile of a transit station without age restrictions and suitable for families. With compliance, we will maintain access to certain discretionary state grant programs. We are creating zoning, not housing. There is no requirement to produce housing to achieve compliance with Section 3A. Concord is one of a large group of cities and towns in eastern Massachusetts that are included in Section 3A requirements. As you can see, many neighboring towns and cities are going through the same process. These community classifications determine certain parameters of Section 3A requirements. Concord is classified as a commuter rail community. This means that we have one or more commuter rail stations with at least 100 acres of developable land in the station areas. Rapid transit communities in blue have subway stops. Commuter rail communities in green trace out the commuter rail lines, such as the Concord on the Fitchburg line. Adjacent communities and adjacent small towns in yellow and light yellow fill in much of the rest of the area. Multifamily housing does not necessarily mean high rises. It includes a variety of housing types, often referred to as missing middle or workforce housing. As of right means development without the need for a special permit, and the multifamily overlay district zoning requirements cannot be more demanding than the existing underlying zoning code. However, as we will review in the presentation later, site plan review is allowed. What does developable land mean? It means all privately owned land with specific exclusions that we'll discuss shortly. It also includes certain public lands, such as some lands used by local housing authorities or identified in a housing production plan. Land included in the 3A district may already be developed. A key number in this zoning is the amount of developable land within a half-mile radius of the commuter rail stations. The Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, or EOHLC, formerly the Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, certifies this number based on GIS surveys. For Concord, this amounts to 519 acres of developable land. There are many exclusions: public land, municipal, state, and federal, wetlands and water resources, protected open space and recreation land, such as conservation land, public and private rights of ways, land protecting water supplies, and privately owned land used for educational or institutional use. This highlights the land around the Concord station. This land highlights the density of the land compared to other stations across the state. This highlights the density and land around the Concord, West Concord train station, which has a slightly higher but similar density to that of Concord. Another key concept is that of capacity. Capacity of a lot or area is determined based on the number of dwelling units any proposed zoning would allow by right, as if it were undeveloped. There is no need to count existing units. So here you can see in the example, if you have 2 existing units, but a capacity of 4, it's 4. If there's nothing on the site, it's still 4. And if there are 4 units on the site, it remains 4. As a commuter rail community, Concord is required to have 15% of its total housing units zoned for by the new zoning for a transit-oriented multifamily overlay district. That total for Concord is 1,094 units based on the existing 7,295 units in Concord today. Also required by Section 3A is a district of reasonable size. For Concord, that is 50 acres. And of that, 50% of the zoning district must be in contiguous lots of land. How is the percentage of land that must be zoned within 1/2 mile of a rail station calculated? The state has based this on the total of developable land in the station area. We know that that number is 519 for Concord, which equates to the requirement that 50% of the district be within 1/2 mile of the rail stations. Eligible areas for zoning are generally near transit stations or areas of concentrated development. A final concept is that of gross density. A minimum density of 15 units per acre is required. As you can see, the determination of this calculation lies heavily on GIS. This is why the planning department has retained GIS consultants who will be available on June 28th to describe this process to everyone who would like to draw their own maps with their own GIS software. However, the planning department will sponsor community map creating sessions later in the summer and early fall. Presented here are some numbers, or a number of examples of multifamily housing density in Concord that could achieve this overall density goal. Remember, it's a district-wide requirement in zoning, not building, and it's a district-wide requirement where sub-districts of variable amounts of density by sub-district could be defined. There are several other issues addressed in Section 3A. The multifamily overlay district must be suitable for families with children. The zoning does not prohibit senior housing, but cannot require it. Site plan review is allowed, as are intensity limits. And inclusionary zoning is permitted, but there are no requirements to include affordable units in the as-of-right projects. EOHLC will consider an affordability requirement as long as the zoning requires no more than 10% of units to be affordable and limits the cap of income on families or individuals who are eligible to not less than 80% of the median area income. Exceptions for higher amounts of affordable housing or lower income requirements could be approved with the support of an independent economic feasibility analysis. And mixed use development is permitted, again, as long as the goal of 15 units per acre is achieved across the district. As mentioned before, compliance would allow Concord to participate in these grant programs. However, they have been used sparingly by the town in the past several years. To reiterate some points of interest, Section 3A does not require new housing development. Compliance is not measured by production. It does not require communities to pay for infrastructure needed in a 3A district. It does not preclude districts with lower or higher densities, as long as the district-wide average is 15 units per acre. It does not override Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act or Title V of the Mass Environmental Code. And it does not provide communities with any options for waivers or exemptions. To summarize, Concord is designated a commuter rail community for the purposes of the MBTA Community Act of Section 3A. The town must create zoning for a district or districts that allow at least 1,094 units of multifamily housing to be developed as of right. 50% of these units need to be located within 1/2 mile of a rail station. At least one district of multifamily housing of a contiguous 25 acres should be created. The average density of these units across all districts must be at least 15 units per acre. There may be no age restrictions, and the units need to be suitable for families. Sounds easy, and then here's the timeline. And the deadline for compliance is by the end of 2024. We hope that this will be approved or reviewed, certainly at Concord's town meeting in April or May. And as you can see, there are many other towns that are addressing this issue with us. Several of them have already submitted their applications, and we'll be watching to see how those are dealt with by the state. So with that, I'll see if I can stop sharing and see if I can get some thoughts from members of the board in terms of potential questions or any issues that you think you'd want to drive in terms of the conversation we have next week with our consultants. Maybe if you have any thoughts, Elizabeth, you can join in as well.
Okay, so I do know that before Linda spent all this amazing time pulling that together, that both of our consultants have been working on pulling together a presentation for at least the community engagement consultant was also pulling together just some basic 101, this is what zoning is, this is what a zoning overlay district means, because those words continually are used. And then our GIS consultant is just going to go into a little bit more explanation on how some of those maps that Linda showed, how are those, what are the requirements under the MBTA guidelines for doing that mapping exercise. And, he was going to just give a brief 10-minute intro into that so people can kind of better understand. There's a lot of requirements in the guidelines for the whole mapping GIS compliance side of things. So just kind of defining some of these terms that keep getting used. So I think that will be helpful for the session next week, next Wednesday.
Now, Linda, here you were asking for comments about the meeting on next Wednesday on the 28th. Yes?
Mhm.
Just checking.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I do have some comments on some little things about this bullet item is phrased this way and could be phrased that way,
Oh.
but these are not at the
I-
content level, and I don't see that I should bring them up in a public meeting. I mean,
Okay, no,
I'm not trying to hide them. It's
yeah,
just,
no, no,
who
no,
cares about commas or something?
no, any comments on the presentation itself, I'm more than grateful. I'm not sure that I'm gonna ever use it again, but I'm more than grateful to take. It's really more to get, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I know everybody has probably looked at the website, and I thought, if we had certain things that we wanted to make sure that the consultants were available to discuss next week, then maybe it would be good to plan that in advance so they could address that and sort of had a sense of what the audience would want to know. But that was mostly what I was looking for. Rob?
I just think we're going to have to be ready for a lot of commentary, during the meetings. We've already seen it already, with people being very concerned about how this is going to go. And, we're going to need to really spend a lot of time, addressing those fears for those people, because I mean, we've seen it already, and it consumed probably a good hour of one of our meetings. So just more of a commentary, especially for Abby, who I don't think was on when that had occurred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it really is a good point, and I think that's going to drive a lot of our meetings this year in terms of trying to get feedback and trying to present people with the facts and the understanding. I think there are a lot of questions about this. It's very complicated, and the more you get into it, I'm finding out it doesn't get necessarily less complicated. And it's all new territory with 175 towns trying to figure it out. Yeah. Abby.
I just wanted to raise this now before we get further into the discussion, because I want to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Looking at the GIS map of the Concord train station, I believe both of our properties are located within the half-mile potential district area. I think we should likely file a disclosure to that fact. I don't think it influences our ability to participate in the process, but I think that should be made a public disclosure, only because it's in the potential area where a district could be placed. I think there's an argument to be made that we would have what would consider to be a financial interest as a butters. And I think to avoid any suggestion or implication or anything that we would be positioning a district either within or outside of that area where our property is located, I would think that disclosure should be made and should be reviewed by town council.
You make an interesting point. I'm also within a half a mile of the West Concord station.
And Elizabeth this might have already been considered, but the number of board members that live in the potential zone. But I think it's something that we should consider before we step into a public meeting about it not this public meeting, but in a broad community meeting.
No, that's interesting. I have no problem identifying myself as, in the town center. I think the issue is that it could be placed literally anywhere. I mean, that's 50%. We have a higher percentage likelihood that we'd be affected. But this is a town-wide issue, and
but it does need to be located within a half mile of the transit station, correct? Or am I misunderstanding that?
50% does.
50% does. I would still say that the potential exists, and I would not like to see this process derailed because someone would come back and say, this many planning board members, they moved that 50% over there or over there, or they moved it to where their property is, or what have you. So I would just want to make sure that we made that disclosure.
I will follow up on that
Okay, thank you.
and let everybody know.
But I don't think in terms of public discussion that people who are commenting need to disclose, but I think for planning board members, that's key. Okay. Elizabeth?
I did want to just give everybody an update. We are also for the June 28th event, we will have flyers and put information up on the website that there will be an event, probably like the third week of July, an event the third week of August, and then an event the third week of September, where I'm discussing with the consultants now, like July and August, we can do an online, by Zoom, regarding the whole mapping conversation, and our consultants looking into whether we can have an online, mapping option where people can just go to a website and put a pin where they think multifamily housing might be appropriate. I also do know for the 28th event, the presentation will also just include a number of slides of different types of multifamily housing. It isn't the the 6 to 12 story apartment on Fresh Pond Parkway that you see. It's it's the duplex with the cottage in the detached unit in the back, or so that will also be part of the 28th. But we will have those other dates lined up so that people can plan for those well in advance. And also for September, would definitely be the community involvement in the actual language of the zoning bylaw itself, so that October, November, December, the planning board can flush all of that out and basically have public conversations about that all the way to the end of December. So that is something that we're trying to nail down by next Wednesday.
Well, maybe if we have, do we have any other comments from the board? Maybe if people have then over the next week or so are thinking of any topics or specific questions that they want to forward to the consultants, they can send that to Elizabeth, and then you can come up with something to send them. So if they have issues that
I
would best be addressed.
Yeah, I would ask, if board members haven't gone to the website and looked at all the information, we're adding new stuff and updating stuff, pretty much every other day. So if there's, something there that you think is missing or could be elaborated more, currently, our FAQ is like 6 pages. So we are working to, pull things, similar things out and make like little 1 or 2 page documents. So somebody by topic. So somebody, who's interested in the sustainability side of things will, we'll have a an FAQ that is focused on, say sustainability, or an FAQ that's focused on the housing side of it, or the, diversity, equity, and inclusion, aspect of multifamily zoning. So we're working on trying to, take that 6-page FAQ, which is incredibly informative, but it's a lot to go through. So we're trying to figure out ways to make all of this information, a little bit more accessible, and to what people are thinking and what their passion is.
Perhaps we can move on to any public comment on that MBTA. Carlin, I think you were first in sight.
Thanks. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I was going to ask this question on the 28th, but I'll give it to you now. First, I'm glad you're going to be explaining what an overlay district is. I'm not sure I know exactly how it works, just in general, so that'll be useful. But here's the question. Why didn't we propose an overlay district last year for the Thorough Business District?
Well, an overlay district, well, I don't know that I actually know the answer to this, but I could try it, Elizabeth, or I could actually
Yeah.
ask you to answer
Sure.
that question, but.
So for the Thoreau Depot, the proposed Thoreau Depot zoning dealt specifically with one defined zoning district, and that is the Thoreau Depot district, and look to just amend the requirements for that one district. So you can amend the zoning, and the goal was to actually change that zoning for that particular district, because the MBTA communities requirement, West Concord's the best example. That will just that half-mile radius covers West Concord Village, West Concord Business District, West Concord Industrial, Industrial Park A, Residence C, and possibly Residence B. So to go through and try to amend each and every one of those zone districts just becomes almost impossible. So
Plus, there's an extra problem, which is that there are also parts of Residence B that are not within a half a mile. So you couldn't exclude them from the changes. Yeah.
Right. So you would end up, possibly having to change a boundary, or so what the overlay district does is it preserves that underlying zoning. So everything in West Concord Business, that zone district is fine. You can still do everything that zoning allows. And then this is just basically kind of like a little extra layer that gives you the ability to do this one very specific, and multifamily, and has very specific zoning requirements if you want to do that one thing.
Mary?
Thank you, Linda. Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green. I'm a member of the select board. Speaking for myself, this is complicated. This really is. I really appreciate, Linda, you wanting to lay out all the information for people so that they understand everything. Somewhere there's a sweet spot between overwhelming people with information and giving them enough so that they can make an intelligent decision. I remember when I first started going to town meeting in Concord, I would vote against some of the planning board zoning because I didn't understand them and I was just afraid. So somewhere there's a sweet spot. I do have two questions. One, you said that there's no provision for waivers or exemptions. I assume that means that this is non-negotiable with the state. Is that accurate?
In terms of
Anything.
Well, I don't know what you mean by non-negotiable, but in terms of a developer, there aren't waivers in terms of complying with the requirements set by the state.
Okay, let me ask it in a more colloquial way. There are people in town that say, you know, this just isn't Concord, right? So should we be saying this just isn't Concord, or can we get into, is there any flexibility with the state? That's the question that I'm hearing. Do you think, and I heard you say that there's no waivers or exemptions. So what should be my answer when people say, well, you know, this just isn't Concord?
Well, tell them to come to the sessions and help us make it Concord. I mean, I think,
Yep.
I think that, you know, I think that that was what I tried to set out in our goals, you know, and I, you know, we can continue to discuss this, but the whole point is to take 3A and make it into something that Concord can be comfortable with in terms of our housing objectives, you know, our sustainability goals, what we need to do in terms of improved transportation, so that that this is a scaffold, and I don't think that we can walk away at this early stage until we've thought through. Every other piece of zoning is also a scaffold. Every other piece of zoning tells you what you can and cannot do. This is just the same. It's just zoning. You can say, yeah, we've zoned every, you know, square inch of land in Concord. This is just another piece of zoning. It's still going to be Concord.
Okay.
Right?
So,
Okay.
Linda, if I can also add to the specific questions, in the MBTA communities guidelines, there are no waiver provisions in the guidelines. There's no exclusions in the guidelines that if a community does X, they don't have to do Y, or there is no provision in the guidelines.
Okay.
And section 3A is a law, and there's no waiver provisions in the law that if a community does X, you don't have to do Y. So
Okay, thank you. That's what
We've used
Linda.
our 3 minutes.
Okay,
But-
I'm done.
So I'm gonna take Carol.
Yeah, hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. I had a couple questions. One was about the GIS. I know I looked at what you guys did before in a previous planning board presentation. And it was really hard to tell on, you know, a small piece of paper, like what was included, what wasn't included. So I was going to suggest when you have the meeting next week, if you could blow it up so people can actually see like what's all included in the GIS in the different areas is kind of number one. And number two is, since we need 1,094 units within half a mile of the train station, I think we should cast the widest net possible and look at all eligible properties within that radius. And when I looked at it last time, you know, things came to mind like Commonwealth Ave and Walden Street, for example, in West Concord, which is right next to the MBTA station, were not included in the first pass. And I think that they should be, because those are eligible properties. So instead of excluding everything at once, you should include everything. And then as you go through the forums with, you know, the townspeople, you know, then you can eliminate, but versus eliminate at the beginning and try and add back, I think is kind of backwards of way of addressing the problem. Because people will say, well, why is Commonwealth Ave and why is Walden Street not included? It's right next to the MBTA station.
Thanks for your comment. Okay.
Get an answer or just a comment?
I don't really know what the answer was. I guess we will pass on to the consultants that they need to make the maps bigger so people can see them more easily. And well, you know, the I'll say that the 1,094 number is the total. 50% needs to be within the half-mile radiuses. So it's not, you know, there are a lot of numbers, a lot of figures, a lot of complexity. Yeah, I think we heard your comments. Thank you.
Right. I think I was more concerned about why Walden Street and Commonwealth Ave weren't included. So that would be what I'd be looking for an answer.
Yes, and we don't, I mean, that was not a plan. That was a demonstration. And again, the GIS, I'm sure the exhibits that they'll have next time will be examples, but they're not a plan. So I wouldn't take anything, and I would welcome that you come to the mapping sessions. And that's really, I think, when it's going to be the time to roll up sleeves and make those comments about exactly where things, you know, might go or might not, and sit down with a group of people from the community and design something, because you know, I think that's the opportunity to put that kind of input in. I don't think that will be really the output next week, but those 3 sessions that Elizabeth outlined will be where you can talk about specific ideas. And so we'll welcome that, but it's a little early for that. But thank you.
Sure.
Prashar?
Thanks, Linda. Parashar Patel, 397 Sudbury Road. Speaking on my personal behalf, not for the Finance Committee. I had 2 questions / clarifications. One is to follow up on what Mary asked. I got the impression from the presentation you just did, Linda, that the consequence of a community not developing an overlay district by December 2024 is that they would simply not be eligible for a number of different state grants. Is that correct? That's the only consequence right now, correct?
I would say there's a high degree of uncertainty about that. And I will take your comment, and I think that would be a good thing to bring to the consultants next week. There is in the legislation that we would not be eligible for a certain number of state grants. Yes.
Okay.
There also has been issued by the Attorney General a more some language that would say that would extend beyond what's written in the law to other penalties. I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what the outcome would be beyond what's there outlined in the law is that a certain number of grants. Yes. And
So, I think it would be helpful for the outreach session next week to actually just be very clear on what those are, as well as specifically how much Concord has received from those grants, say, over the next couple of years. And I have no idea whether it's possible for us to know from Terry, et cetera, for, you know, next year, the year after, kind of what we're anticipating getting from those grants, just so that residents have a sense of what the consequences are, right?
Mhm.
That's number one. And then the second question, I think, and until, again, your presentation was good, it didn't dawn on me, but I think it would be really helpful for folks to understand that the 1095, call it 1100 now, units, only half of them have to be within a half-mile radius. And, you know, the other half, for example, can be outside that radius as long as I think it's contiguous. Is that what you said? So that the overlay, or does it not have to be contiguous?
One large area needs to be contiguous. This is my understanding, and I certainly hope that the consultants can confirm this, but I may be wrong. This is my understanding, that you need to have one large contiguous area, but then you can have additional areas that will count in the total 50 acres that we're required to zone if they're minimum of 5 acres of either one lot or contiguous lots put together. But if they're smaller than 5 acres, they won't count at all.
So let me just ask the question, follow-up question, last one this way, because I think it might be helpful for residents throughout the town to understand this, if I'm correct. There are certainly well-defined parcels that are excluded, conservation land and everything else. Is it possible for the developers to identify only those? Because it sounds like absent those, depending on how you shape the districts, the zones, the rest of town could also fall into the overlay district or districts.
Well, you can have multiple districts.
That's my point though, right? So that
Right.
absent, what I might suggest is a reverse map that says we know definitely these parcels are out because they're conservation land or, you know, the prison, et cetera, but then the rest of them could be eligible. I don't mean to get scared, but it certainly, I think everybody needs to be aware that it's not just within certain radius of the center. It could be many different parts of town.
Mhm. Thank you. That's a
So
good comment.
Linda, I
Yeah.
do want to make one factual correction.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
It is not just a 5 acre parcel anywhere in town. I mean, DHCD is not gonna approve a 5 acre parcel at the end, you know, out at, you know, off 117. There's a reasonableness within, you know, that half-mile radius. If an example may be the where Paparazzi and Best Western, that's just outside of the half-mile. But if you were to put all those commercial properties together, that's more than 5 acres. You know, there is a reasonableness test that the state will use when approving the district. So it is definitely, I want to make sure that's very clear. It is not the whole entire town.
So I think that's a good clarification, Elizabeth. I think
Yeah.
some sense of what is included
Yeah.
beyond that half mile, to the extent it's possible, would be helpful for folks.
So Linda, if I can, because I just got this, and this has not been flushed out. I'm just going to kind of, you know, these people that are on this call are, I'm putting this as our, you know, our core diehard, you know, people that are going to provide great input. So if I can share my screen, how this kind of works is, you know, this is what the start of the GIS map looks like. The purple is the half-mile radius, shows the train station, and all of these different colored areas are excluded areas. So that will be the starting point for the mapping session. You know, I will probably, you know, bring this in a little bit because, like I said, you know, over here, you know, the state, housing and livable communities, the state would likely not approve, you know, a multifamily district, you know, way over here in this bottom left-hand corner. You know, that's that reasonable test. But, you know, up here, this is where Paparazzi is, and, you know, Route 2, that is an area that, you know, they may consider. So this will be the starting point for the mapping exercise.
That's helpful, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
I'm glad.
Keith?
Yeah, it's
Oh.
a complicated thing. So,
Actually, may I ask a question, Elizabeth? With this reasonableness test, this seems very difficult because we have to come up with a plan to present to the voters, who will then, I mean, a plan that we come up with in concert with the voters, everyone who comes to the meetings and submits input and so forth, that then gets voted on by the town. And it's only after that the state decides what's reasonable. So for any parts, and we may choose to put all of it within a half mile of the train station, but if some of it of our overlay district is outside of a half mile, we could then find that the state rejected parts, even though we thought we had been reasonable, and then we fail to comply by the end of the year. Am I correct in thinking that that's very confusing because we have to know in advance of them telling us whether they will approve of it or not?
So that's why having these particular consultants on board, because they're already working with other communities. So you have to remember subway communities, their deadline is this December. So we will have a lot of information from what DHCD has approved, not approved. But I will pose that question now if there has been any guidance provided by the state on, this distance. I know, 7 miles from the train station. No, I don't think the state would approve that. But is there a range? So I can definitely ask that question now and see if that's been asked yet, and two, get the state thinking about that now, because they're going to have to deal with it in 170 something communities.
Yes. Thank you. Keith?
Thanks very much. Keith Bergman, 56 White Avenue, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And at our, I just want to remind folks that at our June 7th Concord Housing Roundtable, we heard many of the same comments tonight. I love Mary Hartman's comment then and now, which is sort of, we need the elevator speech, and that if we can, and it would be great if we could emerge from next week's public forum, getting closer to that idea. What are the core parts of what this MBTA communities means to Concord? It's going to be about the map. It's going to be about what is the best locations of multifamily housing to ensure Concord's character, and if that means putting it at places that are. So there needs to be general agreement about what are the best places to do that. I see where some other communities, if they don't have a lot of land, but they need a lot of units, they go up, that they say that they need more floors in order to do it. If that's not something that the Concord's character is comfortable with, then it needs to be more area rather than to accomplish it. The question keeps coming up about what are the penalties. And I've got to share here, so I'm going to share it. That in the FAQs that the town has prepared, there's a page on the section on compliance, and as Elizabeth said, it is the law, and that the Attorney General has made clear that non-compliant communities are going to be subject to civil rights. Civil enforcement or risk other things with fair housing laws. Beyond that, though, that the state administration is making it pretty clear that communities that want to get things from the state, which we do, we want help with sewers and all sorts of things, that it will be easier for the state to be helpful if the communities are not in violation of the law. The question comes of, well, Concord hasn't applied for grants. That's hardly a badge of honor that Concord has seldom, if ever, applied for the grants that it would be denied if we cease to be compliant with this law. In fact, the plan for achieving many of the things that Concord wants to do will require the funding sources that would be off limits if we're not compliant. So it's the right thing to do. We need to figure out what the best way it is to fit Concord's character. I think that's going to be focusing on the map, figuring out where and reaching agreement on that. So staff's been doing great work. The team's been doing great work. Appreciate the briefings at these planning board meetings, and looking forward to next Wednesday night. Thank you.
Yes, Bashar?
Yeah, Keith, thank you. And thank you for the clarification, particularly on the Attorney General advisory opinion. My question wasn't implying that we shouldn't comply, but when the slide says these are the penalties and further penalties may be coming, it gives the impression maybe we don't have to and it's not a big deal. And again, on the dollar amounts, I think transparency is best. So if we haven't gotten the money, I think we should say that. If we think we're planning to apply for the grant, say that. But to me, the more interesting part was the civil monetary penalties or whatever else the Attorney General said could be coming, right? And that has financial consequences for the town that we ought to be aware of as well. Just put that up front so people really know it's really not optional.
And Elizabeth?
I wanted to just quickly, because it's already 20 after 8, quickly add to Keith's comment. I also want everybody to kind of start thinking about the zoning itself, because we will have multifamily by right, but we can incentivize for things that we might want to see, like mixed use in the West Concord business or West Concord Village. And so multifamily might be by right. You might only get 1 story, and let's incentivize. And in those certain areas, you might be able to get 2.5 or 3 stories with first floor commercial and residential on the second and third. So those are also things people should think about. What you can incentivize pretty much almost anything is what we've been told. So that's also something to kind of just think about.
Thank you. And Rob?
Just a quick question, Elizabeth. Have we looked at what the increase in housing units would do to the sewage system? Like what the demand would be? I mean, that just curious, because that could be a huge expenditure there on its own.
So no, because the answer is no. Because this is just zoning, there's no mandate to build. Private property owners don't have to build. And if somebody does come forward with a proposed project, they still have to go through the same development processes. Part of the zoning may be multifamily. It may be by right, but you have to have a site plan review and review the wastewater or water impacts or traffic impacts. So all of those still get reviewed from a project-based standpoint. So for just the zoning, no, there would be no analysis, because it may be somebody might do a small project and do an on-site sewage disposal system. So it really, that level of detail is a project-based level, not a zoning-based level.
And Sue?
Elizabeth, you mentioned that we can incentivize anything in any way that we feel is best for our town, but we may also consider that no one has to actually take advantage of incentives. So for example, if we rezone some particular area with incentives, people could choose to forego the incentives and simply build the multifamily housing as allowed by right. Correct, yes. So it would be a possible way, if we rezoned a lot of commercial,
Well-
of business or industrial land, it could then be built out purely as housing, losing us our businesses in those areas potentially.
Well,
Because,
we're
yeah.
not rezoning anything. We're
Well,
doing an
I-
overlay.
Well, that is a form of rezoning, but yes, rezone
well,
through an overlay. It would, because the underlying uses would still be allowed, but it would become possible to build pure housing, which it is current,
Correct.
actually, depending on the district, currently it is, and currently it is not possible to build pure housing. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Shall we take one last question on this topic and then move on? Carol? Or one last comment?
Yeah, sure. So Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. The number of units is 1,094. There's some confusion about if there's already multifamily zoning within the half a mile district, we can count those to the 1,094, or is it 1,094 new units? Because I think somewhere along the line, I heard somebody explain that you could count already existing units within that area to decrease the number. Is that, how does that work? I'm kind of confused on that.
No, it's as if when you do the zoning is independent of what exists on the land today. I don't know if that's helpful, but if you, so you essentially ignore. So you could say you have a lot that has a house on it, but you zone it so that you could put 15 units on that. You don't subtract the 1 unit from that or add 1 unit to it. It's just zoned for 15 units.
Okay, so if there's like a duplex in Thoreau Business District today that counts as 2 units or 3, call it 3 units, and you're gonna do the overlay, which now says instead of 3 units, you can go up 40 feet and build to greater density. So now you get 25 units. That counts as 25, even though nobody's built the 25 and there's 3 existing units there. Is that what you're explaining to me?
I believe that's right.
Okay, yeah, it would be great just to, make that clear because it's very confusing in the public outreach sessions.
Yes,
And then,
it's a
yep.
good point. Thanks. We'll
Yeah.
give the consultants the sign
Yeah.
that is confusing, because it is confusing.
it is very, I know you touched on it briefly, but it went way over my head. So the other one was just on the whole SHI 40B topic. I know that we're below our 10% now in the town, and we're trying to get that up. And I know that there's restrictions, it sounds like, that we can only have 10% or something affordability in this. I guess I'm trying to understand how much of the new, if we have to build 1,094 units, how is 10% going to SHI? Or what amount can we get to go to SHI, I guess is the question.
There's no requirement for any inclusionary zoning in section 3A. But the state will accept that many communities do want inclusionary zoning, so that they have said that up to 10% may be deemed inclusionary, and at an 80% area mean income. If you wish to have higher amounts than that, you need to have a economic feasibility study by an independent source using methodology that is acceptable to the state, that shows that that will be economically still feasible.
Okay,
So essentially, they don't want you to zone for something that's never going to be built because it won't make a developer any money.
right. So what the state is saying now is we can only have 10% that will go towards SHI to qualify for the MBTA Community Act. Is that correct, what I just heard you say?
Unless we have a separate study that says that economically it's feasible to go higher. Then we can
Okay.
submit that to the state and they will make that determination.
Okay.
It's not a
and
foregone
today-
conclusion.
Right. So today we have 20%, right, that goes to SHI, and that's the zoning today, or is that something else?
That it depends on where you're talking about. I don't remember the exact number for every, the overall part of town or within half a mile of the train stations. I don't think we've zoned that.
Well, for one thing, within the residence districts, there is no requirement unless you have a PRD, 0%.
Right, right. Well, I think it would be good because I know like on the Thoreau district and the combined business last year, I thought, we said some of those slides said the existing was 20% that was affordable. And you were backing that number down for both Thoreau and the community combined business act to less than 20%, but it was more than 10%. So I'm just trying to understand what we have today and what the new regulation is, so people can understand what impact that's going to have on the town, right? Because we all know that, the housing production plan said we're below the 10%, and we want to obviously keep that number up. So that would be another thing to just give some clarity to folks so we know what we're voting on.
Yes, well, we don't have anything to vote on right now. So this is all discussion. So if you have comments in terms of that's great. But we'll ask the consultants to try and make that clear in their presentations as well. Thank you.
That would be great, Linda. Thank you.
Yeah, let's see. I think we're going to move on now from the MBTA discussion to additional administrative business. And with that, I think our next agenda item is the final 2023-2024 Planning Board Goals and Projects Memo. And I think, Elizabeth, would you like to begin that discussion?
There, that's better. Updated this memo based on the board's conversation at the last meeting to have this be from the board to the select board, and went through and made the edits that were discussed. And Sue, I think I got all your edits in, but if you have, I know everybody received this so late, but if you have other editorial edits, I can definitely make those before sending this.
Great, because sorry I do, and I did get comments back to you, but I got them back to you, you
No
may not have
worries.
had time to breathe before the meeting started even.
No worries. But so this is, Linda, I don't know if you wanted to talk about your two comments. And then, we can go through each one of these. The first 9 are updates from last year's goals and projects, and then we get into the next coming year's goals and projects. I don't know if
Yeah, I think we discussed that this probably would be next year. Yeah, I guess for FY25, that's what we were talking about.
yes, to funding for, so I don't know if if having this sentence, since this is just an update from last year,
Yeah, we probably don't need that there.
need it for this one, but make sure we get it in including in so we have and then we can include this that statement in this future list under site plan rules and regs. And then I think this additional information is about the economic feasibility analysis to be able to have inclusionary zoning for affordable units. So I just kind of just expanded on that a little bit.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that it would be informative if we could receive funding to find out if we could increase or not the affordability component in the MBTA communities, multifamily housing. If we can't, we can't. I mean, it's going to be an independent analysis and it will tell us what parameters we have as an option. So I think that would be
Right.
useful to include.
Right,
And
which
then,
we have applied for a grant. We're waiting to hear on that grant to be able to do the economic feasibility analysis.
great. And then my understanding is that once we would come up with final zoning and submit that to the state, that it would be appropriate then to begin a discussion of site plan review guidelines, and then because we would want those, who knows how long the state will take before they approve anyone's plans. But it would be useful if when the plans are approved to have been able to get site plan guidelines out to the community, discussed, reviewed, a hearing, and hopefully get input into the site plan process that we could employ once the zoning has been approved.
Definitely. And then you had added item 8. I don't know if you want to speak to that one.
I just wondered, given that so much effort, I think, has gone on in the past in terms of community engagement. There's a lot of interaction with other departments and other constituents across town, but it seems to me that that's become a very important focus for the planning board, is to be even more collaborative, more outreach, more understanding, and zoning is a very complex area, as a number of people have weighed in on just this evening. How do we simplify? How do we make it understood? How do we build a level of understanding and comfort with the concepts of zoning? And so it seems to me that we're going to be putting in a great amount of effort and investment on that this year, and that we should make that a goal to really feel comfortable with the process and the plan and the path that we're on to understand the aspects of community engagement that we have maybe not had as one of our strengths, some might say. So I thought it would be worthwhile putting that down as a goal and acknowledge it. Any thoughts?
That looks good to me. I like that change.
Yeah, I have no
All
objection.
your changes.
Well, if there are no objections,
So I will review, I'll go through Sue's edits.
I just checked them and it's all just making it slightly easier to read in a couple of places, nothing of substance.
Perfect. That's always appreciated.
I try to be unsubstantial.
all right. Shall we move on?
I don't know if you want to take a poll of the board members to put forth this letter to the select board.
I certainly do. So I would be happy to poll or call for, so I just call and see. I'll just ask Abby. Would you be
Yes.
comfortable with this going to the
Yes.
select board? Rob
Yes.
and Sue?
I like it.
Okay, I guess it's okay
Me
with
too.
me too, so
Great, thank you.
thank you. So we can move on. And Elizabeth, you're still center stage. Are we willing to go through the Envision Concord action plan? This is,
It's up to
Oh.
you if you want to. I mean,
I
I-
think
I-
so.
okay, give me 2 seconds. I'm saving this letter in 2 places just because.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. So I just went through your action plan from last year, and I'll touch on the highlighted items, which are the ones that changed. Just the Historical Commission did amend the demo review bylaw this last town meeting to provide a little bit additional review time. It was 45 days. It's now 60. And then updated this item to reflect the changes in the fiscal years as far as when site plan rules and regs would be done and when subdivision rules and regs would be done. And definitely updated the mixed use to reflect the MBTA communities. And updated just the time frame to 1 to 2 years. It was in progress, but with the site plan moved out a year. And the same thing with this item, just changed the time frame date. The updated HPP completed, so that was nice. Then we had just the payment in lieu of units. It used to say housing groups, and we have the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. With this item was the FAR discussion. So I removed that and just since this is going to be discussed at a later date by the board, put no specific action identified at this time. And for this section, added the adoption of amendments to the tree bylaw and rules and regs, and then added the site plan rules and regs, changing the date to 1 to 2 years. Again, added the MBTA communities as in progress. MBTA communities in progress. Added the senior planner working with TAC and doing the transportation and mobility plan. Again, dealing with the FAR, no additional actions identified at this time. The adoption of the energy specialized energy stretch code was completed. In progress is your parking analysis of the zoning bylaw. Again, the transportation and mobility plan. And that's it. So I know, this came very late for the board. So just briefly running through this, and then if you want, I can put this on the agenda for 2 weeks. And, if the board wants to have a more in-depth discussion after looking at it in more detail, because I know Abby's new, Rob's new. I don't know if Mark was on last year. He was on last year, I think, when you did this, but.
Yes, but he and I have only barely been on for a year. Actually, I have a question about how this matrix works generally. If something is mentioned in the long range plan, in the Envision Concord plan, or something that the planning board should pursue, should it be in what we were just looking at? To give you one example, the Envision Concord plan says the planning board should consider 2-family housing permitted by right. And you marked as completed that the town passed a change to zoning to allow 2-family housing, but it's by special permit, not by right. So does that mean it should still be in the matrix to consider whether it would be appropriate to allow it by right, or is it left out because it's not part of our goals memo that we just discussed for the coming year? How does this matrix get set up?
So there's no guidance on how the matrix gets set up. I think the planning board is one of the few boards and committees that actually has this, in this format and goes through it each year.
Well, thank you, planning department, for the division, for helping us do that.
So I think I think that that's a perfect example of completed just means what what got completed, and if there's another step, you could put well, not in progress, because that's what you're doing now, but maybe for 1 to 2 years, the board may want to consider 2-family by right, or maybe 2-family by special permit in all the other districts, not just residence C. So I think this chart informs your goals memo, and pulling items from here into your futures projects list of things, and maybe you pull the 1 to 2 year items off this list and put them on your goals and projects list. As a kind of like a checks and balance, or it's entirely up, to the board. I mean, this matrix is, it's very heavy to review. But I think it's just, it continually is something just to, inform the board as they move forward. I don't think on your goals and projects memo, you can put all these things, because as the first paragraph of your goals memo, how it got changed, because every year something else pops up that puts something else on the back burner. So like right now it's the MBTA communities, and it's basically put almost everything else on the back burner.
Okay, so it's more like the other way around. If we want to go crazy listing things that we may or may not get to, they belong in the matrix,
That's where I
not
would,
in the goals memo. Okay, so then maybe we should consider putting something about, to take an example, to family, either by right or in more districts in the matrix. But you're quite right about our goals for the next year.
so I think that would be a really great exercise, for your next meeting. I've, kind of gone through this, and especially for Rob and Abby, explained, how this works and identified some of the changes, but, going through the items and to Sue's point, that's a perfect example of, hey, well, let's take this one, the next step further, which is very similar to what we, with like ADUs, we started off, with little, and then, expanded it. And that's kind of how most zoning, has been adopted. You adopt something, see if it works, and, expand it or change it, or, and so maybe the conversation in 2 weeks can be, all right, for this one, let's kind of think about the next step for this. Is there a next step? And include those items on this list.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Do we want to assume, let's see if there's any public comment? If not, then we can move on to the the potential 2024 town meeting zoning bylaw amendments.
So this is again a standard conversation the board has in June and July, after touching base, and we just I haven't gotten input from the building commissioner yet, but I keep my running tab of potential zoning bylaw amendments, with the understanding that the board's going to be very busy over the next year. So not looking to do something that is going to be as intense as MBTA communities, but a couple of the things thought about was for the mobile food establishment, putting in a requirement for a parking space. So if a restaurant has a mobile food establishment, making sure that there is a space for it to park. So that's one idea. They're out of the parking analysis. The consultant's going to make recommendations. There may be certain things in there that could move forward very quickly. I know Sue and Linda have been working on some minor cleanup edits. So that's another one. I've asked the Economic Vitality Manager to touch base with the Economic Vitality Committee on looking at the zoning bylaw section that deals with fairs, bazaars, and special events. And currently it's limited to nonprofit, philanthropic churches, and education. And there's certain parameters and to have it by right, but all other outdoor events generally require a special permit. But you just, if you're not one of those three entities or the town, you can't even go through a special permit to have an event. So from an economic vitality standpoint, whether they thought, if somebody wants to, hold an event and, and they want to go through the special permit process, whether that's a possibility from an economic vitality perspective. And then the last item that just came up this morning deals with this particular example is in the West Concord Industrial District, which is only that area behind Beharrell Street. And then the strip, the two commercial buildings that you access off the end of Winthrop Street.
Wait a second. Isn't it also Bradford Mill?
I'm sorry, what?
Isn't it also Bradford Mill off of?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
That's okay. Sorry, hang on one second. So the question today was somebody who was interested in doing a winery and being able to, process and store, wine, but being able to have a small retail component where people can come in and do tastings. Well, in any of the industrial zone districts, retail is not a permitted use, even as an accessory use.
But then the Neshoba Bakery is in the industrial district, and it is permitted to sell its tasty baked goods as an accessory use.
So Neshoba Brook Bakery is something that has been there for a while. And hang on one second.
Its parking lot, of course, is in the business district, but the bakery itself is in the industrial district.
And I also believe that from a permitted standpoint, so I will, hang on one second. I don't have my glasses either. I should have my glasses. Well, I can't see, so I can't answer your question, Sue, on
Okay.
But I do know that the bakery itself has been there. And it may have been permitted in a different manner at a different time before the West Concord Industrial Zone District went in. How long have they
Back when
been?
it was plain industrial, before it was West Concord Industrial, yes.
Yeah. So I'll have to look into that one a little bit more, because I know they also, they have the whole bakery and the restaurant and or cafe. So I can't answer that one. There's a lot of these one-offs, but whether that's something that the board would want to consider is having accessory to a light manufacturing or that retail component. So those are just things that, first come to mind, and what I will do is I will write these up so that they're a little bit more explanation to each of them. But then I will also look into Neshoba Brook Bakery, Sue.
I hope you'll do that in person and have something
Oh, yeah.
delicious.
Any public comment on that section? Then we can move on to liaison and, oh, sorry. Thank you, Mary.
I do have, I'm interested in the conversation that you just had about the potential winery coming in with tastings being maybe something that makes it more difficult for them to do business in Concord or running afoul of some zoning restriction. I think that's why we hired the economic vitality manager specifically to kind of shepherd these things through the process. So I'm wondering if she's involved in this at all. Can somebody tell me that?
So I can tell you that she is aware of this, but she would not be involved as far as the zoning bylaw and the permitted uses and how that works. That would be myself and the building commissioner as the zoning enforcement officer on whether. So somebody would go to the economic vitality manager and say, hey, I'm interested. Do you know of a space, this might work, and she is, working with people that want to come and do business in town. But if there is a particular space where they have questions on whether something is a permitted use or not, that falls to the building commissioner and myself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Comments? If not, then we'll wrap up with any liaison comments or town planner update.
So I do have one update. We received today a copy of a letter and plans for a notice of filing with the state for a comprehensive permit at 310 Baker Ave. So this is the start of a process for a comprehensive permit. They file with the state for a project eligibility letter first. The state will have notified the planning board and the select board. They will then schedule a public, I don't know if it's open to the public. I know the town representatives are invited. I don't know for sure if it's just an open, site visit or not. And until we get the letter from the state, I don't know specifically their process but they do schedule a site visit, and they provide formal notification to the town. The town will have a certain number of days in which to provide comments on the project back to the state for consideration in their project eligibility letter. Should the state issue, it's called a PEL, should they issue the project eligibility letter, I believe they have up to 90 days in which to do that. Should a favorable letter be issued from the state, at that point, the developer files an application with the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I will be putting together basically an information memo for town staff and boards and committees on that comprehensive permit process. It is different than, let's say, a special permit process. It has a much shorter time frame in which the Board of Appeals has to operate. It is a single public hearing that goes through the Board of Appeals. So there are, for anything other than a state requirement, such as the Wetlands Protection Act, or any other state or federal requirement. So just wanted to give the board a heads up. It's 2 buildings, 201 units. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the site. Off Baker Ave, there's the driveway, there's a little pond right there to the left. The 2 buildings, one on each side of the pond, is the proposed location.
So what role does the planning board have in this process?
As soon as the town gets notification of review, then the board can, discuss this and provide feedback to the select board. It will be the select board who submits the letter to the state with any comments regarding the project. So I would imagine the select board will ask different boards and committees and town staff to provide their input for a consolidated comment letter.
Sorry, Elizabeth, just a quick question. When you say this is an expedited timeline, what does that mean in a ballpark?
So for a standard like special permit, the Board of Appeals has 45 days in which to open the public hearing, and then they have 90 days to file their decision after the close of the public hearing, which the Board of Appeals can keep the public hearing open for quite a few months. Some projects, like the PRD, the public hearing's been open for 9, 10 or more months. For a comprehensive permit, the Board of Appeals has a certain number of days to open the public hearing and a certain number of days to file their decision from the date the application is submitted, unless the applicant agrees to time extension. So that time frame is more compressed.
Okay. And 310 Baker Ave is within a half a mile of the West Concord MBTA station, correct?
It is, but the proposal that they're submitting, I do not think that any MBTA community zoning we're developing would allow this project by right.
No, I'm just thinking.
Yes. Oh,
Right.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I think as the crow flies, it's 1,000 feet from the train station.
Okay.
Wait, so then it's at the south end of 300, 310, or is it at the north end? Because there's 2 different ponds. Actually, I'm having a little trouble telling what's a pond, just because I did this very quickly.
No, there's only one pond on site. Oh, you mean the little retention pond way behind the Marriott?
Oh, okay, so you meant the one at the south end. I see,
Yes.
got it. All right, now I understand. Yes, thanks.
So we're going to try and get, once we get notification, we're going to try and get, digital copies and, have that posted somewhere. The state may post it on their website. I don't know how they post information, but if anybody's interested, there's currently a paper copy in our office and at the townhouse.
Any other reports from board members? Then we'll take public comment. Carol?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Did you say that it's 200 units, 201 units going in at 310 Baker Ave? Is that correct? Potentially?
So the developer has filed for a project eligibility letter for the state for 201 units.
Okay. And if I heard you correctly, you said it would not qualify for the MBTA Act at this point in time, what they're requesting. Is that correct?
I believe it's 6 stories.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the zoning for the MBTA communities is going to look like. But I can't imagine the community wanting to permit by right 6-story buildings within the MBTA communities overlay district. I could be wrong, but
So none of those units would then count towards MBTA Act.
so units, I mean, it for the MBTA communities, units don't count. So you have to have zoning that allows the development of 1,094 units. It's zoning. There's no building, there's no development associated with the zoning. For this comprehensive permit, yes, 20, I believe it's 20%. They are proposing it to be rental. So that is the weird aspect of the comprehensive permit law. Even though 20% or 25% are affordable, all the units will count towards our 10%.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand this. Because it's not zoned up to 6 stories, and if they build to 6 stories, then none of those units will count towards MBTA because it's not zoned correctly. Is that correct?
So currently, the town does not have any multifamily zoning.
Okay,
Additionally, this area is zoned industrial park A, which does not allow residential units at all.
so how are they proposing residential units in something that doesn't allow it?
This is where if you think your head is going to explode with MBTA communities, throwing comprehensive permit in there is a comprehensive permit overrides all local zoning bylaws, regulations, rules, guidelines. So if a community falls below 10%, somebody can go through the process through the state for a project eligibility letter and then file a comprehensive permit with the town. They have to list all of the items that the project needs to override. So all of the sections in the zoning, whether there's other rules and regulations in the town bylaws, they have to list those, but they get to make that request and override anything in the zoning bylaw, including use, dimensions, height, floor area ratios, lot coverage. They can override any of it.
Okay, so then I got it. So they can build 200 units or 201 units if this gets approved. And then you said something about 20%. So 20% of those, will those be affordable? And then they
Yes.
count towards SHI? Is that what you said?
Because it's going to be a rental project,
Yeah.
20% will be deed restricted affordable, but all the units will count towards the SHI.
Oh, that's great.
So
So-
that's how the community got to over 10% was when was it Nathan Pratt? I think it's called the Prescotts now.
Right.
Yes. So all those units count, even though they're not all deed restricted affordable.
Okay. But now we're under 10%. So if these 201 units go forward, will we be over 10% or we're still under?
No, we'll be well over.
Oh, okay, well, at least we hit our SHI, which is
Yeah.
good. But we didn't hit our MBTA. It would be great if we could somehow make those MBTA eligible as well as SHI eligible. Would that economic feasibility analysis or somebody, can they look at that and somehow make them, find a way to make them count towards the MBTA?
So for the MBTA communities, it's not, there is no mandate to build. There is no counting of units that get built. The MBTA guidelines, because there's no mandate to build, it's just zoning. You just need to document that your zoning can accommodate 1,094 units, but there's no requirement that they be built. So there is no counting of units.
Got it, okay. But those would not qualify because of the height. And the multifamily doesn't exist and they're building them.
Correct. The multifamily zoning doesn't exist currently. But additionally, when the zoning does start to get drafted with community input, what is allowed by right for the multifamily, there may be, a push to allow 6 stories by right. I don't think so, but
Well, stay tuned for June 28th. How's
yeah,
that?
well,
All
not
right.
June 28th is just the information session. So stay
Right.
tuned for, July, August, September, October, November, December.
Can we say in the MBTA zoning that certain areas like Baker Ave, which is sort of, off by itself and sort of a commercial industrial area, that be able to go up to 6 stories?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to ask. I'm not sure if it can be segmented in that manner, but
It could be I think, a sub-district,
yeah, it's-
possibly, because it certainly
yeah.
looks like it's 5 acres of contiguous.
Yeah. So that would,
It's worth a question
yeah, it's
on
worth
the
a question.
28th. Yeah, so keep those questions coming.
Yeah, it just gets more complicated with every
It
question.
does.
Yes. All right,
Thank
on that cheerful note, can we, if there's no more public comment, may we call this a completed first meeting that we talked about the MBTA, and we'll remember that. And otherwise, everyone have a great evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.